All right, chapter 12. It may be that upon the new principles we can account for the mysteries of the Mary Celeste, if there is a selective force which transports stones exclusively, or larvae, nothing but larvae, or transports living things of various sizes but nothing but living things. Such a selective force might affect a number of human beings, leaving no trace because unaffected to everything, because unaffective to everything else. I take from the report by the Queen's Proctor in the Admiralty Court, published in the London Times, February 14th, 1873. Upon the 5th of December, 1872, between the Azores and Lisbon, the crew of the British ship De Gratia saw a vessel made out to be the American brigantine Mary Celeste. Her sails were set and she was tacking, but so erratically that attention was attracted. Whether ships are really females or not, this one looked so helpless or woe begone that all absence of male protection was suspected. The Britons shoved out and boarded the vessel. There was nobody aboard. There was findable nothing by which to account for the abandonment. Every part of the vessel, inside and out, was in good order and condition. In the logbook, the latest entry, having in it no suggestion of impending trouble of any kind, was dated November 25th. There was no sign of any such trouble as mutiny. A fail of oil used by the captain's wife upon a sewing machine stood upright, indicating that there had been no rough weather. Investigation of this mystery was worldwide. The State Department of the United States communicated with all representatives abroad, and every custom house in the world was more or less alert for information of any kind. But 14 persons, in a time of calm weather and under circumstances that gave no indication of any kind of violence, disappeared, and either nothing or altogether too much was found out. I have a collection of yarns by highly individualized liars or artists who scorned in any particular to imitate one another, who told 30, 40, or 50 years later of having been members of this crew. London Times, November 6, 1840. The Rosalie, a large French ship bound from Hamburg to Havana, abandoned ship, no crew to an explanation. Most of the sails set, no leak, valuable cargo. There was a half-starved canary in a cage. But I suggest that with our hints of teleportation, we are on the wrong track. Crews of vessels have disappeared, and vessels have disappeared. It may be that something of which the inhabitants of this earth know nothing is concerned in these disappearances or seizures. In the New York Sun, April 24th, November 30th, the French astronomer and meteorologist General Frederick Chappell is quoted saying that aircraft missing at sea and seacraft may have been struck by meteors, that there is something of the unexplained in these disappearances, many writers have felt. But there is no recorded instance of aircraft flying over land having been struck by a meteor, and I know of a few instances of reported falls of meteoric matter upon vessels, and no instance of a vessel that has been much damaged by a meteor. The disappearance of the Cyclops, a fuel ship of the USN, even though in wartime, is considered mysterious. Sometime after March 4th, 1918, after leaving Barbados, BWI for Hampton Roads, Virginia. When the Titanic went down April 15th, 1912, flotsam was reported months afterwards, and there were many survivors. But after the disappearance of the White Star steamship, the Noronic, in February 1893, two empty lifeboats, supposed to be hers, were reported by a sea captain, and nothing more was seen. In the report by the London Board of Trade, it was considered highly improbable that the Noronic had struck an iceberg. It was said that this vessel was almost perfect in construction and equipment. She was a freighter with 75 men aboard. There were life belts for all. New York Times, June 21st, 1921. Disappearance of three American ships. Difficult to think of piracy. Seemed to be no other explanation. 5 departments of the Washington government investigating. In February, the Coral Deering, a 5-masted schooner of Portland, me, had gone ashore near Diamond Shoals, North Carolina. The mystery is similar to that of the Mary Celeste. Nobody aboard, everything was in good condition. The circumstance that attracted most attention was that the crew had disappeared about the time a meal was to be served. A little later, a bottle was picked up on shore, and it was a message purporting to have been written by the mate of the vessel. An oil burning tanker has boarded us and placed our crew in irons. Get word to headquarters of the company at once. Just how somebody in irons could get a container for a message makes me wonder. Still, if it's a bottle, they say that it could be got by anybody in double irons. In the London Daily Mail, June 22nd, the finding of another bottle with a message in it is told of from the captain of the Deering, this time that he had been taken prisoner by the crew and had been put upon another vessel. After the Waratah mystery disappeared off the coast of South Africa, July 1909, 5 bottles, all said to be hoaxes, were found. There is as much complication and bafflement in this subject as in anything that science is said absolutely to have proved. If some of us tire of our existence and would like to try some other existence, they had better think it over, because anything merrier than ours is hard to conceive of. Every shipwreck or any other catastrophe brings out merrymakers. The tragedy of the Waratah was enjoyed a long time. More than 13 years later, November 21st, 1922, another bottle, said to be a hoax, was found near Cape Town. Still, I am affected just the other way, and I'm taking on a new pessimism. Heretofore, I have thought cheerfully of bottles, but there's a depression from anything. Once the humorists get a hold of it. Damn. Once the humorists get a hold of it. I wonder how comes it that nobody has reported finding an old bottle, and in it a sea captain's account of an impending mutiny. Signed, Christopher Columbus. New York Times, June 22nd, 1921. More ships added to the mystery list. Almost simultaneous disappearances without a trace regarded as significant. Times, June 24th. About a dozen vessels in the list. And yet, such a swipe by an unknown force of the vessels of a nation along its own coast was soon thought of no more. Anything could occur and not openly visible, or if observed by millions, would soon be gulfed in forgetfulness. Or soon it would be conventionalized. In the year 1921, it was customary to accuse the Russians. I think that the climax was reached in the year 1927, when unruliness of natives in the jungles of Peru was attributed to Russian agents. Still, I suppose that for years, whenever there is revolt against misrule and oppression, propagandists will tell us the same old yarn of otherwise contented natives misled by the Russians. In June 1921, the way of explaining the disappearance of a dozen vessels was by saying that it was thought that the Soviet government was stealing them. It may be that constructions from somewhere else have appeared upon this earth and have seized crews of this ship's Earth ships. In their book, The Cruise of the Bacchante, the two young princes, sons of the Prince of Wales, one of them now the King of England, tell of a strange light as if of a phantom vessel all aglow. It was at 4 o'clock morning of the 11th of June 1881 between Melbourne and Sydney, reported by the lookout of the Bacchante. The unknown appearance was seen by 12 other members of the crew. Whether there be relation or not, 5 hours later, the lookout fell from a cross tree and was killed. Brooklyn Eagle, September 10th, 1891. Something that was seen at Crawfordsville, Indiana, 2 a.m., September 5th. Two icemen saw it. It was a seemingly headless monster, or it was a construction about 20 feet long and 8 feet wide, moving in the sky, seemingly propelled by fin-like attachments. It moved towards the Iceman. The Iceman moved. It sailed away and made such a noise that Reverend G.W. Switzer, pastor of the Methodist Church, was awakened and, looking from his window, saw the object circling in the sky. I suppose that there was no such person as the Reverend G.W. Switzer, being convinced that there had probably never been a Reverend G.W. Switzer of Crawfordsville, and taking for a pseudo standard that if I am If I'm convinced of something that is something to suspect, I looked him up. I learned that Reverend G.W. Switzer had lived in Crawfordsville in September 1891. Then I found out his present address in Michigan. I wrote to him and received a reply that he was traveling in California and would send me an account of what he had seen in the sky. Immediately after returning home, but I have been unable to get him to send that account. If anybody sees a headless monster in the sky, it is just as well to think that over before getting into print. Altogether, I think that I make here as credible and scientific a demonstration as any by any orthodox scientists so far encountered by us. The problem is, did a headless monster appear in Crawfordsville in September 1891, and I published the results of my researches. Yes, a Reverend G.W. Switzer did live in Crawfordsville at the time. I'd like to know what Mr. H.W. H. Smith saw September 18th, 1877 in the sky moving over the city of Brooklyn. It looked like a winged human form. Zoologist, July 1868. Something that was seen in the sky near Copiapo, Chile, a construction that carried lights and was propelled by a noisy motor or a gigantic bird, eyes wide open and shining like burning coals, covered with immense scales, which clashed together with a metallic sound. I don't know what will be thought generally of our data, but in the New York Times, July 6, 1873, the writer of General Notes tells of something that he considered the very worst case of delirium tremens on record. This was before my time. He copied from the Bonham, Texas Enterprise that a few days before the time of writing, a man living 5 or 6 miles from Bonham had told of having seen something like an enormous serpent floating over his farm, and that other men working in his fields had seen the thing and had been frightened. I suppose that equally deliriously inhabitants of the backwoods of China would similarly describe one of this Earth's airships floating over their farms. I don't know that this one account considered alone amounts to anything, but in the Times of the 7th of July, I found something else noted. A similar object had been reported from Fort Scott, Kansas. About halfway above the horizon, the form of a huge serpent, apparently perfect in form, was plainly seen. Hold on. New York Times, May 30th, 1888, reports of several places. In Darlington County, South Carolina, a huge serpent in the sky moving with a hissing sound but without visible means of propulsion. In the London Daily Express, September 11th, 1922, it is said that upon September 9th, John Morris, coxswain of the Barmouth, Wales, lifeboat, and William James, looking out at the sea from the shore at Barmouth, saw what they thought was an airplane falling into the ocean. They rushed out in a motorboat but found nothing. In the Barmouth Advertiser of the 14th, it is said that this object had fallen so slowly that features described as features of an airplane had been seen. In newspapers and aeronautical journals of the time, there is no findable record of the airplane of this Earth reported missing. There was a series of occurrences in the summer of 1910. Early in July, the crew of the French fishing smack Jeune Frederic reported having seen in the sky off the coast of Normandy a large, black, bird-like object. Suddenly it fell into the sea, bounded back, fell again, and disappeared, leaving no findable traces. Nothing was known of the flight of any terrestrial aircraft by which to explain. Upon August 17th, laborers at work in the forest east of Dessau, Germany, saw in the sky an object that they thought was a balloon. It suddenly flamed, and something that was thought to be its car fell into the forest. The chief forester was notified, and a hunt on a large scale was made, but nothing was found. Aeronautical societies reported that no known balloon had been sent up. It was thought that the object must have been somebody's large toy balloon. About this time, the fall from the sky of a white cylinder of marble was reported. One of us pioneers, or whatever we are, Mr. F.T. Mayer, looked up this matter and learned that the reported occurrence was upon the farm of Mr. Daniel Lawyer, Rural Route 4, Westerville, Ohio. I wrote to Mr. Lawyer asking whether the object could be considered artificial. I had an idea that it might or might not be a container of a message that had been fired to this Earth from Mars or the Moon or somewhere else. Mr. Lawyer did not like the suggestion of artificiality, which he interpreted as meaning that he had picked up something that had been made in Ohio. He said that it was not an artificial object, but a meteorite. For a reproduction of a photograph of this symmetric, seemingly carved cylinder, 12 inches long, weight about 3 pounds, see Popular Mechanics 14 801. About 9 p.m., August 30th, lights as if upon an airship moving over New York City. Aviators were interviewed, but all known aircraft were accounted for. World, September 2nd. That two men had sent up a large kite upon the 21st of September. A great number of round objects were seen passing from west to east over the lower part of New York City. Crowds stood in the streets watching them. They were thought to be little balloons. I have records of similar objects in large numbers that could not be considered little balloons. For several hours, this procession continued. If somebody in Jersey City was advertising, he kept quiet in his bid for publicity. The next day, at Dunkirk, New York, an object described as an unknown cigar-shaped balloon was seen in the sky over Lake Erie, seeming to be unmanageable, gradually disappearing late in the evening. There was so much excitement in Dunkirk that tugboats went out and searched all night. Toronto Daily Mail and Empire, September 24th. Someone on a tugboat had found a large box kite which had been sent up by a party of campers and was undoubtedly the reported object. Mr. A.H. Savage Landor, in Across Unknown South America, Volume 2, page 425, tells a story that was told to him by the people of Puerto Principe, Peru, in January 1912, that some years before a ship had been seen in the sky passing over the town not far above the treetops. According to his interpretations, it was a square globe, flying a flag of stars and stripes. Mr. Savage Landor thinks that the object might have been the airship, which upon October 17, 1910, Wellman abandoned about 400 miles east of Hatteras. In newspaper accounts of this unsuccessful attempt to cross the Atlantic, it is said that when abandoned, this airship was leaking gas rapidly. If a vessel from somewhere else flying the Stars and Stripes is pretty hard to think of, except by thinking that there are Americans everywhere. Also, the square globe is not easy, at least for the more conventional of us. Probably these details are faults of interpretation. Whatever this thing in the sky may have been, if we will think that it may have been, it returned at night, and this time it showed lights. In the New York newspapers, September 1880, all allusions to an unknown object that had been seen traveling in the sky in several places, especially in St. Louis and Louisville. I have not been able to get a St. Louis newspaper of this time, but I found accounts in the Louisville Courier Journal, July 29th, August 6th, 1880. Unless an inventor of this earth was more self-effacing than biographies of inventors indicate, no inhabitant of this earth succeeded in making a dirigible aerial contrivance in the year 1880, then keeping quiet about it. The story is that between 6 and 7 o'clock, evening of July 28th, the people of Louisville saw in the sky an object like a man surrounded by machinery, which he seemed to be working with his hands and feet. The object moved in various directions, ascending and descending, seemingly under control. When darkness came, it disappeared. Then came dispatches telling of something that had been seen in the sky at Madisonville, Kentucky. It was something with a ball at each end. It sometimes appeared in a circular form and then changed to an oval. It passed out of sight, moving south. These are the stories of at least harmless things that were or were not seen over lands of this earth. It may be that if beings from somewhere else would seize inhabitants of this earth wantonly, or out of curiosity, or as a matter of scientific research, the preference would be for an operation at sea, remote from observations by other humans of this earth. If such beings exist, they may, in some respects, be very wise, but supposing secrecy to be desirable, they must have neglected psychology in their studies, or unconcernedly they'll drop right into Central Park, New York, and pick up all the specimens they wanted and leave it to the wise men of our tribes to explain that there had been a whirlwind and that the Weather Bureau, with its usual efficiency, had published warnings of it. Now and then, admirers of my good works write to me and try to convert me into believing things that I say. He would have to be an eloquent admirer who could persuade me into thinking that our present expression is not at least a little fanciful. But just the same, I have labored to support it. I labor like workers in a beehive to support a lot of vagabond notions. But how am I to know? How am I to know but that sometimes a queen idea may soar to the sky and from a nuptial flight of data come back fertile from one of these drones? In the matter of the disappearance of the Danish training ship Copenhagen, which upon December 14th, 1928, sailed with 50 cadets and sailors aboard from Montevideo. I note that another training ship, the Atlantia, British, set sail early in the year 1880 with 250 cadets and sailors aboard from Bermuda and was not heard of again. Upon October 3rd, 1902, the German bark Freya cleared from Manzanillo for Punta Arenas on the west coast of Mexico. I take from Nature, April 25th, 1907, upon the 20th of October. The ship was found at sea, partly dismasted, lying on her side, nobody aboard. The anchor was still hanging free at her bow, indicating that calamity had occurred soon after the ship had left port. The date on a calendar on a wall of the captain's cabin was October 4th. Weather reports showed that there had been only light winds in this region, but upon the 5th, there had been an earthquake in Mexico. Several weeks after the disappearance of the crew of the Freya, another strange sea occurrence was reported. Zoologist 4-7-38 that, according to the log of the steamship Fort Salisbury, the second officer, Mr. A.H. Raymer, had October 28, 1902, in latitude 5 degrees 31 feet south and long 4 degrees 42 feet west, been called at 3:05 a.m. by the lookout, who reported that there was a huge dark object bearing lights in the sea ahead. 2 lights were seen. The steamship passed the slowly sinking bulk of an estimated length of 500 or 600 feet. Mechanism of some kind. Fins, the observers thought, was making a commotion in the water. A scaled back was slowly submerging. One thinks that seeing for such details as a scaled back could not have been very good at 3 o'clock in the morning, so doubtly damned is this datum that the attempt to explain it was in terms of the accursed sea serpent. Phosphorescence of the water is mentioned several times, but that seems to have nothing to do with 2 definite lights like those of a vessel. The captain of the Fort Salisbury was interviewed. I can only say that he, Mr. Raymer, is very earnest on the subject and has, together with the lookout and helmsman, seen something in the water of a huge nature as specified. One thinks that this object may have been a large terrestrial vessel that had been abandoned and was sinking. I have looked over Lloyd's list for the period, finding no record by which to explain.